Good morning, church. It's good to be back home. I had a wonderful time away on the Outer Banks with the family, but it's really nice to be back home as well. Katie and we actually were going to be borrowing somebody's car to head down because we have a very old and tired car at this moment. It's a 2006 Mitsubishi Endeavor, now with currently around 205,000 miles on it. It's been through a lot with us. We have done a lot with it, gone a lot of places with it, but it's starting to get tired. We were going to be borrowing somebody's car, but we packed a lot of stuff, and so we didn't have room in the other car, so we had to take ours. It's kind of an unexpected thing, but we took the car all the way down to Hatteras Island on the Outer Banks in North Carolina, and made it there and made it back. But the thing with cars is you have to take care of them and do some maintenance in order for them to be reliable for you and to get you places you need to go safely. Before we left, we had a couple of tires that were starting to get kind of bald. They weren't really quite bald yet, but I figured on that drive they might get that way. Now when it's dry out, that's completely fine. But when it gets wet and it gets rainy, and especially if there's a lot of rain, those tires can become a hazard. In fact, on the way down, it was perfectly great, nice and dry, like I said. Didn't have any issues, but on the way back, it rained quite a bit, and we hit a spot where it was coming down, and we weren't gonna make it safely if we didn't stop. So we had to make a stop, and after having to wait for 2 hours at a Walmart to get the car to be able to get new tires on it, we finally got done and got back on the road, and we were safe. But there were some moments where we thought the car was going to roll. We thought the car might spin. It's a frightening thing. But you see, if we know that if we don't take care of our vehicles, if we don't change the oil on time, if we don't take care of tires, for instance, some things can go wrong very quickly. If we become complacent with how the car is, it's probably not going to last us very long. It's reminded me of a passage, a couple of passages in fact, but one of them being in the book of Zephaniah, where God has Zephaniah to talk to Israel, and he says this. He says, this is in chapter 1, verse 12, "At that time I will search Jerusalem with lamps, and I will punish the men who are complacent, those who say in their hearts, Yahweh will not do good, nor will he do ill." I think it's in the King James Version where it talks about how the people have become stagnant in spirit. Instead of complacent, they use this idea of being stagnant in spirit. You see, God is punishing the people not because necessarily they're just doing a bunch of evil stuff, although that was happening, but they were complacent. They were stagnant in spirit. They weren't seeking to refresh themselves with God, and because of that, God was going to punish them. You see, they had this idea, this thought that God's not going to do good and God's not going to do wrong or ill towards them. And church, I think we are kind of in that mode today. We sometimes feel like God's not going to do anything wrong to us because God's all loving. God wouldn't do anything or allow anything wrong to happen to us, but the fact is that does happen. And I think we have maybe become a little complacent. We've become stagnant in spirit. So that reminds me of a passage in Romans that I think we would do well today to dwell on. And that's found in Romans chapter 12, starting in verse 1, where Paul writes this. He says, "I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Stop being conformed to this world. Stop looking just like this world, but be transformed. Continually be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that by testing you might find out what God's will is for you, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Church, take some time to think about this. Have you become stagnant in your spirit? Have you become complacent in your life for Christ? And this journey that God has you on, have you stalled out? Have you forgotten to change the tires? Have you not changed the oil, so to speak? Jesus did this. Jesus would take time regularly to go out by himself and to pray. Are you seeking to do that to refill yourself? Are you spending time with your brothers and sisters and seeking to be encouraged in the Spirit and to grow in Jesus? Or do we find ourselves being conformed by this world? Do we find ourselves looking more like those around us that we might spend our time with who aren't of Christ? Or do we look radically different? You see, because Jesus said we've got to sacrifice that about ourselves. We've got to let it die and be transformed to the image of Jesus. And we're going to look radically different from those around us if we do that. Because when we do this, we find out what God's will is for us. And how many times have we said, I just wish God would tell me what to do? Well, this is how we do it. We seek to refresh ourselves daily. We seek to be transformed by the renewing of our minds so that way we might know what God's will is for us. His pleasing and perfect will. Church, let's not become stagnant, and let's seek to change the things in us that need to be changed so that way we don't crash and burn like could have potentially happened to my family on the way home from North Carolina. Let's seek to give ourselves the proper maintenance that needs to be done in our hearts and in our lives because Jesus desires that for us so that we might become more His and seek to know what His will is for us. I love you, church. Excited to see you on Sunday. And until then, hope you have a blessed day. Bye.